So I'm sure our friends will be coming along shortly. So let's go ahead and get started so that John will have plenty of time to share with us. So now it's time for our Dharma presentation. And John will be presenting on the preface and also the part one of the Master Tang Hoi book that we've been reading. So John.
Okay, let me share screen. Okay, everybody see my screen? Okay, so everybody hear me okay? Okay, so one is actually I started reading this document, Master Tang Hoi, a couple of years ago. And this is a Vietnamese copy. And I didn't know that the English version existed until Lena told me. So I looked for it and I found it. So this book is talking about Master Tang Hoi, who is the first Zen Vietnamese master, against the general knowledge that Buddhism was coming to Vietnam from the north. So to diffuse that, Master Thích Nhất Hạnh published this book saying that no, that's not true. Buddhism came to Vietnam through a different path other than from the north, from China. And we have a first Zen master way before Buddhism was moving into Vietnam. So I dig a little bit into the history of the book because I think the first part, introductory, it is the historical setting before he goes into the teaching of Master Tang Hoi. So I dig a little bit into, and what I found is Master Thích Nhất Hạnh actually wrote the first book. It is in Vietnamese. It published around 1974. The title is an essay on Buddhism in Vietnam. And the picture of this book here, he wrote the first book published back in Vietnam in 74 under his writer name Nguyen Lang. When he was young, Master Nhất Hạnh used this name as a writer's name. And then later on, when he lived in France, he finished with volume 2 and 3 and published in France around 1978. And in this 3-volume set book, the first part is talking about the very first Zen master, Master Tang Hoi. And then in 78 or 79, he actually published this separate book, Master Tang Hoi, in Vietnamese. And then I believe in 79 later on, Sister Isabel of Plum Village translated into English. So I also see, put here, you see the statue of Master Tang Hoi in Vietnam. So there are many statues around Vietnam now honoring, he being the first Zen master. So in the book, there are 3 parts. The first part, introduction, is basically he described the historical settings at that time and the geolocations. So when I read it in Vietnamese, everything makes sense. But when I read in English, all the geo names got what? What is this place? So I have to do a lot of Google up to know, all the English terms that being used there. So if you have trouble reading the first introduction, I'm there with you. I have the same difficulties. Uh, and then in part 1 and part 2, he goes more detail about the teachings of Master Tang Hoi about meditation during that time. So back to the history, Master Tang Hoi lived around year 2 to 300 in the Common Era. Back then in China, there is a war, we call it the War of the Three Kingdoms. So back then, there are tribals. They're not really formed a nation as China yet. So, and there are three big group, a kind of small nation fighting to get control over China. One to the north called Wei country, the one to the east called Wu, Dong Wu, Dong in Chinese mean east. So Dong Wu is Wu to the east. And then Shuhan, the one to the west. So the three, this is a very famous war in Chinese history. So during that time, there are a lot of war going on. So Buddhism really have a hard time going to China during that time from India because of the war going on. But toward the south, where the Vietnamese people is living here, back then during that time of year, around 300 in the Common Era, the Vietnamese people living almost around the southern part of China, which are now we call Guangdong, Guangxi, the two provinces in the southern China area right now. And the country name is Van Lang, and Master Nhất Hai said, because I think he knows Chinese and he have good Chinese calligraphy also. He explained that the Van means beautiful and Lang means kind and healing. So he says that the Vietnamese Buddhists start like total around 2,000 years. So it's way more than what people thought that would start from, like in the 14th or after 1200 in the Common Era, when the Chinese start Buddhism start moving to Vietnam. And during that period, Vietnam is under domination from China from around the year 2000 till, well, actually starting from 100 years before the Common Era till 900. So the total around 1,000 years, the Vietnamese people is under domination of the Chinese people. But during those 1,000 years, there's a small breaks when the Vietnamese people uprising and regain independence for around 10, 20 years. Each time there's a small spot of those across this 1,000 years. But when I read this, I have to make two small corrections. I think the information probably wasn't available back then when Master Tang Hoi wrote this. Is what I found is, first of all, he mentioned that the two Chinese officials, Si Quan and Ren Yan, they were sent from China to rule over Vietnam during those years. And from the history, said that these two taught Vietnamese people to, I think to grow rice. But this book I found back in 2008. It's called Spring Vietnam, the Spring Head of Eastern Cultural Civilization. It's available in Amazon. Also, I saw it. Um, so, so after the Vietnam War, there's an article in the National Geography. They do some research and they published that the Vietnamese people know how to grow rice back, 5,000s before the Common Era. Actually, the Chinese people learned that from the Vietnamese people instead of, the common knowledge that these two Chinese officials taught the Vietnamese people how to grow rice. And the second point is the word Van Lang in this book. They refer back during that time. There's a famous history book written by Sima Quan. Any ancient China history, people normally go back to refer to this book to learn. And also in the Confucius book that Thich Nhat Hanh mentioned, the Four Book and the Five Classics. So in these two references, they said that way back in that time, the van word was used to describe the leaders who have broad knowledge and virtuous, who like to study, like to ask when not knowing. That means they're not arrogant. They're not, when they're not knowing anything, they want to ask to know the meaning. They love and kind people, and they keep actions to their bounds, which means they're not abuse their power. And the Lang word, but in those days, in this reference, they said that it's a combination of the word kind and land. So it's kind of describe the land of the kind people. So Van Lang actually means that who are ruled by this kind of ruler. So back into, so that are two minor corrections. I think that that by the time Master Nhat Hanh wrote this book, those facts are not available yet. So he just go by the common knowledge. Okay, so back into the history settings, because Master Tang Ho is living around 200 to 300 in the Common Era. If you look at the Buddhism history, around 300 CE is where the Mahayana tradition starts, and some of the Mahayana scriptures start to appear during that time. And in the part 1 and part 2, you can see that Thich Nhat Hanh said that his teaching being influenced by these Mahayana knowledge way back during the 300 CE years. Okay. So, so that's the historical setting about the land and the Buddhism time back during those 200-300 in the Common Era, and more detail about the life of Master Tang Hoi. So he said that his parent passed away when he was 10 years old. His parent was from a province north of Afghanistan. So his father was there. His father was a merchant. So back then, there are people in India, instead of going through the land route to China to sell stuff, they're going by sea around here to go and reach the southern part of China, which is the Vietnamese people living there to do the trading. So his father coming from probably from the northern part, but he go by sea, going to Vietnam, doing the trading, and then he married to a Vietnamese girl there, and they settled in this province, and so that's where Master Tang Ho is coming from. But unfortunately, their parent died when he was around 10 years old. So he stayed in the temple around this area called Lui Lao, where probably he studied all the Buddhism there and stayed there for quite a while. And in there is where there is a very first Vietnamese temple called the Zo Temple. The English name is DharmaTalk, so it's around this area. Uh, and then you see the mention of the name Jiaozhou a lot. So in the map, Jiaozhou is up here. So you can see that Lila, the Vietnamese, kind of from the geography, we all know that they're in the shape of the S. So you can see the shape of the S here, where Lila Center is in the north part. So on this map, Lila is way back here. And then Jiaozhou is up north. So Jiaozhou is almost within the Guangdong Guangxi area nowadays, but back there, when you look at the Van Lang map, Jiaozhou was up here within this country. So back at that time, Jiaozhou was belonged to where the Vietnamese people back there were living. So during that time, so there are three major Buddhist centers. The first one is in Lui Lao, within the Vietnamese territory where the Vietnamese people live. There are two others that settle in China by the two Amaravati and Nagraju Nakonda. They settled two Buddhist centers, and one is in Luoyang, is where is shown this map here, Luoyang there. And the other one is, what's the name there? I didn't put Pangchang. Pangchang, I didn't show on the map. The Pangchang is on the east near the coastline on the right view land. So when Master Tang Ho grew up, he started moving to Luoyang to do the Buddhist teaching there. So that's where you can see the relation between the two. So it's quite a travel up there and stay there, where he do most of the Buddhist teaching there. And because from the historical setting in the South, they're not really affected by the war going on between the three nations in China. So Buddhist teaching is more flourished in the southern part here. And from those reference books, Chinese people back at that time sent monks to these three centers to learn Buddhism. And I think, and after they learned Buddhism, they start going back to China. And when the war settled, after the war, Shu Han's won. So Shu Han become one China nation, and that is the first Han dynasty in China. So after the war, the Han dynasty, and those people that sending south to learn Buddhism start going back and propagate Buddhism in China. So that is the flow, way back then during the 200 to 300 year in the Common Era. So it's kind of, I kind of try to collect these maps to show the geo location names, so they kind of being related, and know, you know, where the relation of those centers. By just reading the book, I kind of get lost, so I have to dig up all these names and try to find where they are and kind of make the relation. So more in details about the life of Master Tang Hoi. So he lived around 200 to 300 years in the Common Era. His father is from Songdia. This is the province here showing the map on north side of Afghanistan. His mother, Vietnamese. As I mentioned earlier, his parents died when he was fairly young. But he studied around Lui Lao Center, and his knowledge, very knowledgeable about Confucian and Taoism also. And then later on, when he grew up, after he moved to Jiangni, China, he's were close to Luoyang. Jiangni is very close to this Luoyang center here. And kind of teaching Buddhism and meditation there. So where in that area, the first temple named the Buddha Temple was established. And that temple still exists till the 15th century. Actually, the very first temple in Lui Lao, where's that? The very first temple here called the Zo Temple. The English name is DharmaTalk. Actually still exists in North Vietnam today. It looks very modern, but what they said, that it's modern on the outside, but you know, very antique in the inside. So if you look up the wiki for this temple, you can see the pictures and both of the outside and the inside. So I think Master Thich Nhat Hanh is saying that all the Zen master in the Vietnamese tradition, they have to read this book, Flowers in the Garden of Meditation. And through this book, they know about the life and the teaching of Master Tang Hoi, and they acknowledge that he is the very first Zen master in Vietnamese Buddhism. So one of the things special about Master Tang Hoi is that when he teach, he wrote his teaching down. And this is very different from the way all the Chinese masters doing, because the Chinese master is just teaching, and then I think later on when those masters pass away, their disciple start writing down his teaching and, you know, appropriate his teaching that way. So through his writing, his work, we probably understand more about the way he taught Buddhism and meditation in particular. So, so that is the first part of the introduction. It's a little hard to follow, but hopefully with these picture and illustration, you kind of get the idea and the settings back there. So the first part is going into the teaching of meditation of Master Tang Hoi. The title is The Way of Realizing Meditation. It is from the collection of 6 parameters in the scripture, or the collection of all the Buddhist scriptures. So mainly the first part, the summary is that it describes the 4 stages of concentration and the 16 breathing patterns. So it concentrates on those teachings. When you read through that, the way he described is slightly different because he used a term and the knowledge way back in those years so that the people can understand. He relates more to whatever more common back then, but you can relate that to what we learn now is that the four stages that he described basically are the four jhanas that we know from our Buddhism learning. And the 16 breathing patterns, we already know that through the one of the scripture we studied during the 4 year is the Apanasati Sutra, but his description of the breathing pattern is slightly different back then. So when he delve into detail, um, his meditation method, he specified these are the elements. So he mentioned the five wholesome elements. He described it, and basically, when you relate his description to today's how we study meditation, those are basically the 5 stages of the meditation when you try to reach the first jhana, which is the totally concentrated state. So those 5 wholesome elements are like the initial application, the sustained application, the happiness, the bliss, and the total concentration. So we learned those 5 steps during the first book, The Tree of Enlightenment. So we kind of relate the way he described those with what we more familiar with now. And he described during meditation, we have to overcome the 10 unwholesome elements. So the 5 are from the 5 senses. So the 5 senses gets the signal coming in, and then those are distorted. So we have to filter those out. This is similar to the way we meditate today, and whatever thought and something coming, we kind of acknowledge and ignore them. So those are the unwholesome that we want to ignore during meditation. And then the other 5 is the 5 hindrances. We all know from our learning of meditation, the 5 hindrances: sloth and torpor, restlessness, what's the third one? Ill will, attachment. So those 5 hindrances, he described pretty much the same. So the 5 from the 5 senses and the 5 hindrances together, he called it the 10 unwholesome elements. So those are the things that we need to overcome during the meditation. And he described meditation is an elimination process. So basically, we try to detach from these unwholesome elements. And at the higher stage, even though these are the 5 wholesome elements, at the higher stage of the higher jhana stage, like from the 2nd to the 4th, we also detach from these 5 wholesome elements, don't being attached to them. So he described in more detail the 4 meditation concentrations, and as I mentioned, when you look at his wording and compare with what we learn now, it's the same as the 4 jhanas that we learn. So from the first jhana, we go through the 5 stages to get to the total concentrated state, which is the first jhana. And then we go to second jhana by eliminate. We don't need the first and sustained application anymore because our mind is so concentrated, so focused now. We don't need that. And when we move on to the third concentration state, we get rid of ill will. We don't need, to focus to push away ill will because our mind so focused that no ill will can come in. Uh, and in the third and the fourth start moving up, it's the same way we start eliminating one by one ill will and attachment to either physical happiness or mental bliss state that we achieve during the 5 stages to the first jhana. So start limiting those, and we get into the fourth jhana, which is the highest concentration stage. Um, and in describing the achievement uh, through this concentration, what we know is the fruits of the practice are like the stream entry, uh, once returning, no returning, and arhat. He described that similar, but he described those are the quality of bodhisattvas. This is where it's slightly different from other Zen master, which is more traditional to like Theravada teaching. So you can see back here, um, where is that? Here, when we look back the history, so we kind of seeing that he has access to some of the Mahayana Sutra through the trade route by the sea that the Indian people bring, and because he's also knows Sanskrit, so he exposed to those type of scripture. So his teaching is having a mix of Mahayana context in there. So the last two part, when he taught about meditation to realizing the path, is the path of aspiration. That means you have to got to build the aspiration to practice and to do all the right practice to eliminate all the hindrances and attachment, and also the aversion to build to achieve the high state. So he's got the 5 meditation on changes, changes of the face, changes of suffering, joy, acknowledge the change in your intention, contemplation on impermanence on body, wholesome, unwholesome. So going through this and relate to today's teaching, it is similar to the 4 foundations of mindfulness. You meditate on the changing in the body, the changing in your feeling, your perception, which is intention, and the Dharma, which is wholesome, unwholesome. But he taught that in his own language, and to the other people back there kind of relate, understand. But when you read through that, you kind of be able to relate to these things that we learn today. And on the contemplation on these are very similar about impermanence. So if you being attached to worldly thing, it'll bring you not going to bring you happiness, and you contemplate on death, on wrongdoing. So these are basically the same thing, the 4 foundation of mindfulness to describe in the different terms so that people can relate. And then as the traditional Theravada or Zen, they're more focused on the cone, but the way he described cone is different. Is when you are being mindful all the time at certain things, that basically cone as you know, cone, the teacher would throw you a subject and you just contemplate on that subject day and night until your mind got clear and you get it. So his teaching is slightly different, but I think the goal is the same, that you be mindful all the time at certain things that you're actually practicing Kong. So basically that kind of summarized the way that Master Tang Hoi teach meditation way back then. We kind of relate to all the teaching to what we learn now, and I think they are very similar. So this kind of prove that, yeah, he's basically from the Zen tradition with a mix of early Mahayana Buddhism, and this proves that he's a true master, Zen master, and he way back then in the 2300 CE. So people now can, when you know this, kind of honor him and recognize Master Tang Hoi as the first Zen master of Vietnam. So I think that's summary, the introduction and the first part of the book. So